Morning, everyone. We'll just give everyone a few more minutes to hop on. First day after holiday, so give everyone a couple minutes.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm going to rename myself. Okay. All right, Grace, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Okay, great. So sorry about that technical difficulty, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Angela Foos. I'm the Assistant Director here with Development Services at the City of Reno. And you are in the right meeting if you're hoping to attend the stakeholder meeting on our zoning code update, specifically related to some housing initiatives. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. In terms of introductions, I wanted Grace to introduce herself, and then Lauren, I think, is not able to log in. So it'll just be me and Grace today. Grace, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Grace McAdin. I am a Senior Management Analyst with Development Services.
All right. So what we have planned today, we have about 8 slides to get through with the group, and we're going to wait till the end of the presentation to open it up to questions. So if you do raise your virtual hand in the middle of the presentation, know that we're not ignoring you. We're just waiting till the very end of the presentation. And then after that, again, if there's things that maybe we didn't get to, or you want to do more of a deep dive, but not in a group setting, we're more than happy to set up a follow-up meeting with you or any groups that you are working with to answer any questions. Okay, and with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So we are working on some small changes to our zoning code, specifically related to housing. We just wanted to acknowledge that while there's a lot of things that the city of Reno is working on specific to housing, whether it's deferral of fees or Section 8 housing, things that we're doing in other departments, what we're talking about today is really specific to our zoning code and some changes that within the planning department we're proposing. What we're not talking about is any major policy changes, again, related to housing that the city is working on. This is only related to zoning code. We have 2 other categories that's also not part of today's discussion, but the city is working on those items separately. So recently our Reno City Council asked us to do some research, get some feedback from the community on how they feel about accessory dwelling units. Those are things like in-law quarters or granny flats. So that is not part of today's discussion. No, that's kind of a separate item that we're working on outside of these changes. And then the other item is short-term rentals. That's another initiative that our council has asked us to look into. And short-term rentals would be things like a VRBO or Airbnb. City of Reno currently does not regulate short-term rentals. And so this is something council has asked us to explore to see if the community wants us to start exploring an ordinance on short-term rentals, but that's not part of today's discussions. Just want to let you know that if I'm ignoring it, it's because it's specifically not part of the zoning code update changes that we're proposing. Okay. So we've had some people ask, why are we working on these housing initiatives now? Really, what has kind of started this discussion, and why weren't we doing it 6 months ago, or why are we doing it now as opposed to 6 months from now? So really the issue number one is that the whole nation is really grappling with a housing crisis. This is not unique to Reno. This is something that we're seeing across the board. And so jurisdictions all over the country are having these same discussions of what can we do strictly from a zoning code perspective to help with the housing crisis, whether it is the cost of housing or the supply of housing. You know, the supply goes hand in hand with the cost. And so the less you have in terms of supply, the more it's going to cost. But it's also a situation of we don't want just apartments. We don't want just single family. We need to start looking at other alternatives for housing. Maybe people want to live in something besides a single family home, or maybe they don't have to take care of a yard. So there's lots of options in between, and we're trying to come up with things that we can do as a city of Reno to help bring those types of housing to market faster. And again, where we came up with these ideas is we looked at the nation and we said, what are other communities doing? And are there things that we should be doing that they have found to be successful? So those are kind of some of the starting points is what is everyone else doing and what's a success? I mean, how do we measure that success? Outside of really the housing crisis, one thing the state of Nevada with our state legislature did is they passed Assembly Bill 213. And this is a requirement for all local jurisdictions to come up with a separate process to help expediting affordable housing projects. So the good thing is that while the state legislature mandated local jurisdictions to come up with their own rules and regulations, it gives us the flexibility to find a tool that works specifically for the city of Reno. Now, every jurisdiction is kind of looking at that requirement and saying, well, what can we do that's different or better? And so that gives us the ability to find something that fits, again, for our specific city of Reno needs. And it's not something that every jurisdiction has to do that's the same. So again, a couple of reasons why we're working on this now. One is just trying to help with the housing issue as a whole, but 2 is we are trying to meet that need and really the mandate from that Assembly Bill 213. We do have to have some new ordinances adopted by July 1st of this year. So we have 6 months to get something through the process and approved through our city council process. Okay, so we're going to go through each of the proposed changes. And then I'll provide a little bit of data to talk about what we've seen in the past couple of years in terms of what kinds of changes we think this will make. So number one is specifically related to affordable housing, meaning that subsidized low income housing. So projects that meet a certain level of being subsidized, and we put it at a 60% AMI, we would exempt them from having to go through any kind of entitlement review. So as an example, let's say you have an apartment project with 50 units, and it's a low income apartment project proposed to be developed. Normally, depending on what the zoning is, they would have to go through an additional 3-month review process to go through a planning commission review and get that approved. So because that Assembly Bill 213 is asking local jurisdictions to exempt affordable housing projects from entitlements and get them to building permit faster, we felt this was something that really aligns with AB 213. You do have to have that certain level of low income affordability. The way we've written it into our zoning code is that you have to be deed restricted for at least 20 years. So we don't want a developer to say, oh, trust me, I'm going to do low income. They get through the process and then a year later they change their mind and start charging market rate rents. And so this requires then that they are tied to that 60% average median income for at least 20 years. This does not exempt them from meeting other zoning requirements. So if your zoning does not allow for apartments, then this wouldn't work for that project. If you're trying to build something and you're not meeting the setbacks, that would be a variation or deviation. This would not exempt you from that process. Generally speaking, when we have a conditional use permit or what we call a major site plan review or a minor site plan review, that's when you would be exempt and you could go straight to a building permit. So again, ideally, you still have to meet all your zoning requirements, but you're able to go to a building permit stage faster and circumvent that public hearing process, which adds time and money and really uncertainty for those developers. So that's number one. The second thing we're proposing and trying to address that AB 213 is at the time of a building permit. Right now, we don't give any kind of preference to affordable housing projects. They get the same review process, the same timeline as all of our other building permits. Now, on average, the city processes about 10,000 building permits a year. So we have a high volume of building permits that we process. In terms of affordable housing projects, we typically see 2 to 3 apartment projects come in per year that meet that low income affordability. So we don't get a whole lot of affordable housing projects. So we're proposing to assign a staff liaison, basically at the time of the building permit, where that staff person would hold their hand and walk them through the building permit process. The idea is that we would help to get them through that building permit faster than they would otherwise. And so again, meeting AB 213, helping to expedite that affordable housing project to get them to market faster. Okay, next up is what we call our density bonus, so specific to affordable housing. So you have to be able to prove that you are meeting a low income housing need and that you're tied to that for at least 20 years. We currently allow a density bonus for affordable housing projects, but it's specific to projects that are at the 60% AMI and less. We don't allow any density bonuses for workforce housing, which is more of that 80% AMI. Or even higher than that, up to 120% AMI. So we're proposing to try and encourage more of that affordable housing development at that 80% or 120% AMI, which we don't allow for now. So we're proposing to do, if you have that 80 to 120% AMI, that's the low income range, we would give you a density bonus of 35%. So let's just throw some numbers out. Let's assume you had a site that could fit 10 apartment units, so a pretty small site. So with that 35% density bonus, instead of getting just 10 units on that site, you would get an additional 35% or 3 units. So now you'd be able to build 13 units instead of just 10. Again, not a huge number being added, but if we could get 3 more units to market that meet that 120% AMI, that's really a win, generally speaking, for our low income affordable housing sector. And then within the 60 to 80%, we call that more the workforce housing, we would give you a 45% density bonus. So if you had 10 units that fit on your site with that 45% density bonus, that would give you an additional 4 units. And then for the much lower income, that 0 to 60% AMI, Right now, our zoning code caps you at a density bonus of 45%. So if you were allowed 10 units, right now our zoning code caps you to get only additional 4 units. We're saying if you meet that 0 to 60% average median income, we would allow you to have unlimited density bonus. So however many units you could fit on your site is what you would be allowed to do. Now, keep in mind, you still have to meet all the other zoning requirements. So if you have a maximum height requirement of 35 feet, you can't go taller than 35 feet with this density bonus. You still have to meet your parking requirements. So if you're required to have 10 parking spaces on your site, you still have to meet that requirement. This doesn't circumvent that process. It just gives you the ability to put more units, smaller units, when maybe the zoning code otherwise wouldn't allow you to do that. And then next up, this is just for market rate. So we looked at affordable housing as one need, but we also looked at the need for more supply. We're talking about housing and affordability in general. It's really every level of affordability, whether it's a low income market or if it's just an average, whatever the market demand is. And so we said, well, let's look at from a market rate perspective, can we do more to get more density, more supply to market? And so our zoning code currently allows for a density bonus, and this is for market rate. We don't look at the cost of your unit. We just look at the size of your unit. So the smaller the size, the more density bonus you get. Again, we have this in our zoning code now, and just this is kind of background information for the group. The way that our zoning code is broken down is there's 3 categories of size. So if your unit is 1,000 square feet or less, we give you up to a 45% density bonus. So back to that example, let's say you could fit 10 units on your site. With that 45% density bonus, you'd add another 4. We're proposing to up that to give you an 80% density bonus. So you had 10 units that were allowed for the zoning code, you could get another 8 instead of just 10. Still have to meet your height requirements, still have to meet your parking requirements. So it doesn't get you around that. And then the higher up you go, the bigger the size of the unit, the apartment unit, the less density bonus we would give you. So again, we're trying to encourage more of that smaller unit, more of that infill type product. And just as means of example, again, because we currently have that in our code, we do cap it at a 45% density bonus. And we're proposing to go up to an 80% density bonus. So more units is kind of what we're looking for. In the last 3 years, we have had about 12 projects. These are all market rate projects that have used that density bonus. And it's added about 60 units. And again, in 3 years, we've added 60 units to the market using that density bonus. So I don't anticipate this is going to be a huge increase in overall number of housing units, but it definitely will help give developers a little bit more flexibility. If they were, on the cusp of, oh, I could fit 10, but I would really like to make this pencil and be able to get 15 units. They built those smaller units, that 1,000 square foot, they could get those additional units if they needed. So this is something currently in code, we're proposing just to increase the number of units with that density bonus. And then the next kind of big push that we're seeing, and this is something across the country, again, that missing middle is something we're hearing a lot about. It's kind of a buzz term right now. And we've had a lot of people say, well, what is missing middle? We really have 2 ends of the spectrum when it comes to housing. On one end, we have apartments or that high density apartments lifestyle. On the other hand, we have single family homes. So there's not a whole lot of options here in the city of Reno for something in between. And are there things that we can do with our zoning code to try and encourage more of that missing middle, whether it's a duplex product or townhomes, triplex or fourplex, just different types of units. So what we're proposing is to try and take out some of the barriers to development, barriers being time, the time it takes to get you to a building permit, the uncertainty, anytime that you have to go through a public review process or a board, there's always the uncertainty of, well, what if I get denied? Or what if the changes that come out of that review process drastically add cost to my project? And so the way our zoning code works now is in the bulk of our multifamily zoning districts, we have a requirement that if you have more than 100 units, it requires a conditional use permit. That's a public hearing process. We're proposing to keep that. Anything more than 100 units in one project, you would still go through that public hearing process. But anything less than 100 units, we're proposing to go straight to a building permit. We did look at other cities, is it normal to use 100 units as a threshold for what triggers a public review process and what does not? We looked at Sparks and Carson and City of Henderson. We also looked at other places like Spokane, Washington and Salem, Oregon. Generally speaking, projects that are more than 100 units is what would typically trigger that conditional use permit. Less than 100 units, no entitlements. In a lot of jurisdictions, as long as you're zone multifamily and you meet whatever your maximum zoning density is, there's no public hearing. So by far, Reno has definitely more requirements for that entitlement process than I would say the bulk of our Nevada, meaning Reno, Sparks, Washington County, Carson, Fernley, Henderson. So by far, we trigger a lot more entitlements than most of the other jurisdictions and cities. And so this was something that really aligned with what the state legislature is asking us to do, with help get more housing to market faster. It also aligns with best practices and kind of what the norm is in most communities. So we still kept that threshold. More than 100 units would still trigger a public hearing process. Less than 100 units would go straight to building permit. Looking at the last 3 years or so of development, we had about 7 projects, different apartment projects that triggered a public hearing process, that if this was in place, they would not have triggered a public hearing process. So for instance, we had a project that came through and it was 40 units, 40. So not a whole lot of units, but they did have to go through an additional public review process rather than going straight to building permit. So in the last 3 years, the fact that we've had 7 projects that if we had this new proposed change to our zoning code, those would have gone straight to a building permit, would have not had to go through that public review process. Just gives you an idea of how many types of projects we anticipate we would see come out of this. Okay, and then the next missing middle component that we're dealing with is duplex, triplex, and fourplex. And we provided some examples of some of the more modern looking duplex or triplex or fourplex. This could be a townhome, meaning it's a for sale product, so you would buy it, or it could be more of a rent product where you pay a rent. And so this is something that right now you can do in the city of Reno in a lot of our different zoning districts. These are allowed in our multifamily zoning districts, they're allowed in our mixed use zoning districts, and they're allowed in one of our single family zoning districts. So we're proposing just to expand that, allow them in more zoning districts. We have 2 single family zoning districts where we're proposing to add them to. Those zoning categories are SF3 and SF5. And this would still trigger a conditional use permit. So if you were to propose to put in a fourplex in a single family zoning district, it would still require that public hearing process. But right now it's not allowed at all. So it's just giving us a little bit more flexibility in where we allow duplex, triplex, and fourplex. I don't anticipate we're going to see a ton of these. As a whole, we don't get a lot of duplex, triplex, or fourplex here at the city of Reno, just in terms of data. I think in the last 3 years, let me pull up my numbers. We have had about 26 duplexes. That's just a 2 unit that's attached. Again, 26 in 3 years, not a whole lot of those. So I don't anticipate this change to our zoning code is going to do much to add more duplex to the market. But again, the more small incremental things we can do, the better. In terms of the number of triplexes, we've had about 14 triplexes being built in Reno in the last 3 years. And then on that fourplex, so those 4 units combined into one, we've had about 10 of those. So not a whole lot. But again, in looking at, can the city do more to get housing to market faster? Absolutely. We had a speaker come in recently and talk to us about some suggestions, and they were pretty big suggestions. One thing that we wanted to be cautious of is we don't want to do too much too fast. We definitely want to slowly, incrementally make some of these changes so that we don't have any unintended consequences. One of the biggest complaints we hear across the board is, well, what are we doing about schools and about roads and about all the infrastructure with all this new housing? So we want to be cognizant of those concerns and make sure that we are putting in all the infrastructure and we can afford to have police service and fire service for all this new housing that's going in. So these are, again, very small incremental changes that we can make as part of our zoning code, that really address some of those targeted needs that the state legislature has asked us to look at, and help us to just come into performance with some of the things that other jurisdictions around us and in other states are doing to help, again, just get market to housing faster. The more supply we have, the less expensive it is, and also the more housing choice we have, I think the better off we are. Go ahead, Grace. Okay, so in terms of next steps, this is our third meeting in a series of 3 stakeholder meetings. We had 2 last week, and then our last one is today. So we are looking for input from the community. Is this something that we're interested in? Again, these are just zoning code changes. Next step then is we will go to the Reno Planning Commission and we'll do a public hearing with them. That will be on February 7th. And then after that, they will make a recommendation to City Council. So we'll go and present the information to City Council. That will be in the March-April timeframe. Once we get an adopted ordinance in place, that will go into effect. Our timeline for that state legislature mandate is by July 1st. So assuming everything goes on track, we will hopefully have an ordinance implemented in April of 2024, which is just around the corner. So what we're looking for now is feedback. So there's a couple of ways that you as stakeholders can provide feedback. We do have a separate website on our City of Reno webpage where you can get information. We have an actual red line document of our zoning code that shows all the proposed changes. And then we have a link if you want to provide written feedback. If you'd like to provide more verbal feedback, you're welcome to contact us. We can set up a meeting, virtual or in person, to talk about your concerns or any input that you may have. But again, the more feedback we can get, definitely through that link there, the public feedback link, the better off we are. We'll give that information to the Planning Commission and to Council so they can be aware of what the general public had to say. And then again, you as stakeholders, you are part of this process because either you have a need through your personal reasons or through work, or it's just something that is of interest to you. So we definitely want to hear your feedback, understanding that we have a mandate by the state legislature to do this, to do something. These are some small changes that we can make that can hopefully make a small dent in the low income and affordable housing and really just the housing supply in general here at the city of Reno. Okay, so with that, we will go ahead and open it up to, oh, I'm sorry, one more survey. We had talked about the 2 initiatives related to accessory dwelling units and short-term rentals. So we do have a survey that we are trying to push as many people as we can to take it. We're just trying to get your feedback. Do you feel that the city of Reno should allow accessory dwelling units? Again, those are the granny flats. And do you think we should regulate VRBOs and Airbnbs, that short-term rental? So we're looking for just general feedback right now. Is this something that constituents that live in Reno or work in Reno want to support? Fill out this quick survey. Next step is we'll go to City Council in March and let them know the general feedback that we got from the survey, and then we'll get direction from Council as how we want to move forward with those 2 initiatives. Okay, so now let's go ahead and open it up to any questions.
Looks like Rachel has her hand up.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I jumped on here late and I'm wondering if I missed the public comment or if I can submit public comment right now.
You can, yep. So we held off public comment till the very end. So
Okay.
This is the perfect opportunity. Go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you, first of all, for hosting these meetings and for hosting them at a variety of times. I am a single mom and a business owner, so it was nice to have a couple options. I wanted to know, and I'm sorry if I missed this, what evidence the committee has that there is a supply issue rather with regard to housing in Reno, rather than just currently available empty units in Reno. Is there any distinction that was made in your findings of the 2 of those?
So we here in the planning department did not come up with an analysis of how many more houses we need. I would say, generally speaking, because the state legislature is the one pushing us to do this, are mandating really that we do this. We do know there's an affordable housing need. We had a housing workshop with our council back in November, and I think they came up with a need of, gosh, I want to say 19,000 units.
Right.
addressing the need for it from the affordability perspective. We definitely have a need to
Yeah.
have that, you shouldn't be providing more than 30% of your income to rent or mortgage. And by
Truly.
far, this community pays a lot more for rent and mortgage than 30%.
Yeah, the distinction that I'm wondering, oh, can you hear me still? The distinction I'm wondering is made is if though there are currently available empty units rather than, because the committee, it seems like, focused all of their initiatives on building low income housing. But I'm wondering if the committee is open, and this is just a suggestion I'm making. I'm wondering if the committee could look into more expedited solutions like rental caps or multifamily tax exemptions. I'm not sure if you're familiar. But it just seems like there's already been a lot of building in Reno, and most of the units just stay empty because landlords are asking too high of prices. My sister used to live in Seattle, and she was part of a multifamily tax exemption solution, which was that her landlord received a tax incentive for offering a certain number of units at a discount for his apartment building. And so she qualified for this program where she paid a fraction of what the landlord was asking for the other units. And in return, the landlord got a tax incentive. So I guess that's just my suggestion. And I would like the committee, as a renter in Reno, it seems like there are plenty of housing options. It's just that landlords are currently not asking for prices that people in Reno can afford.
No, absolutely. And that is one thing, whether it's rent control or inclusionary zoning, or we've had people ask us, what can we do to help with eviction processes? From a zoning code perspective, we have zero jurisdiction over that. So that big topics, I would say that other departments here at the city of Reno are dealing with, and at the state legislature, anything with tax exemptions really goes to a bigger, broader discussion, not just city of Reno discussion. So definitely topics I know that the state's looking at, local jurisdictions are looking at, not something we can address as part of the zoning code, but definitely something I think as a body here at the city of, at the state, this is something we're grappling with that as well.
Okay, well, thanks. Thanks for hearing me out.
All right, George, looks like you're up next.
Angela, Grace, thank you guys so much. And thanks to everything you guys have all done and Chris has done to make this process for people that are trying to build more housing in Reno easier, faster, quicker. You guys have been phenomenal. So big thanks, at least from me and the people that work with me in Reno. I just want to go back to this point about the parking, which I know, Angela, you and I have talked about. And when you talk about increasing density in some of these locations, that's going to end up not being the restriction in places where there's overlays, and we're back to the one space per studio 1-bedroom unit, 1.25 for 2-bedroom units. We see what that resulted in prior to the change you guys made in the kind of Midtown core kind of area, but that needs to be expanded, and especially in these overlay areas like Wells and other places where you want this density, because your added density bonus isn't going to do anything if I have to park all these spaces on my lots. And to answer questions to people that might ask, well, why is a developer asking for that? Well, if Reno is going to have the density that you're hoping and have housing become more affordable, you can't allow every person to have a car that parks on the street. Parks on the site itself. If you have site coverage, which is how much of a building footprint covers your lot of 25%, that's too low to create the density you guys are looking for. So that would be number one, is where are you vis-a-vis some of these parking overlays and Wells is a specific question. And then the other thing I think that we haven't talked about in a while is, if you're looking to have density in some of these locations, there needs to be better coordination between the city in terms of improving the infrastructure. And I'm not talking about some of the minor, some of the other infrastructure you referred to earlier. I'm talking about like sewer lines, water lines, et cetera. You have areas where you're looking for intense density. Haskell Street's a great example. You have a 95-year-old water main that goes down the middle there. That reduces the ability for developers to build the height and the density that you're looking for. So there needs to be coordination where the people that are doing the work for the city and the city divisions that are doing the work are coordinated and actually making a priority of the areas where infrastructure needs to be upgraded so that the density that you're looking for can exist.
That's great feedback. And I think you were spot on, with the parking requirements. We've had kind of mixed reviews on our parking. Just for the folks in the audience, the way our zoning code works now is if you're in the downtown core area, we have no parking requirements. So you can build a 10-unit apartment complex with no parking, and it's just up to the residents to figure out where to park. The more further out you go from the city core, the more parking requirements we have. And so if you're in a downtown, midtown area, the parking requirements are different than if you're in more of the suburban area. And so we've had kind of mixed reviews from the public. Some people feel we should be stronger and have more parking requirements because it's taking up street parking that maybe in an infill area, there's not a lot of parking. Others, I think to Mr. Graham's point is, parking can be a barrier if you're trying to increase density in these infill areas. And you have options for a lot of people that maybe don't want cars or don't have to have more than one car. They are fine with living somewhere where they can walk to work or bike to work, and they don't need a car. So the more flexibility local jurisdictions like us can provide to make it work for what the market demands, I think the better off we all are. With these housing initiatives, we're not proposing any changes to our parking regulations, but that is something that we've heard mentioned a few times in this discussion on housing, is parking does seem to be a barrier for developers if we have a parking mandate that's too high. So thanks for that, George. All right, Megan, looks like you're up.
Hi there. Thank you everyone for putting together these presentations. Grace and Angela, appreciate your time today. I also kind of wanted to mirror what Rachel was asking about too, because it does seem like we're kind of jumping to this next step when it sounds like we don't quite have the answers for what existing infrastructure is already in place and what kind of low-hanging fruit incentivizations can be done to help expedite that process. Because even if we push development in this area, we're still going to be waiting for that housing, right? And we need housing now. And so I'm curious what kinds of conversations can be had with your entity to be able to try to figure out what that looks like before we push incentivization. But on a separate note, I would also like to ask, there are other models that are happening in different cities like Missoula and other places around the country where they're offering cooperative housing opportunities. Because I would say as a renter here in this town, I also struggle with losing my housing every single year. So even if there is accessible housing around the community, like Rachel said, it's not affordable. So I cannot reach it. And even if I can reach it and I put myself in a position where I can access it, I'm oftentimes losing it. I've had to move every year for the last 5 years because landlords, because of market rate, and because they can say, I can literally charge whatever I want and someone else will pay what you won't pay. And so is there any kind of zoning requirements or policy that can be changed to help support some more cooperative ownership of housing? Because I think until we can really start to support people with having access to housing that they can secure into perpetuity and for our community, we're going to continuously see people being cycled in and out of these spaces. A lot of them are requiring 3 times the rent to move into at this current stage. So it's about $5,000 for a single person to move into a unit. And again, I'm having to do this every single year. And so there doesn't seem to be an incentive for changing that model. And so I'm curious if there's any kind of zoning practices that can be put in place to help incentivize some more of this ownership space to take away this this housing missing piece for folks who cannot access secure and stable housing into perpetuity.
Yeah, and in terms of the co-op housing, I have to look at that. I don't know that we limit co-op housing. I'm trying to think of how that would even work. You could build a duplex or a fourplex and rent out or sell the individual units. You could do that today. We don't limit that piece in terms of townhomes, ownership, if you wanted to do more of like an attached product. We also don't limit that. So I think one of the challenges here in Reno is just finding developers that are willing to build different housing products. We've also heard from a lot of developers that want to take some of these older apartment units and maybe add 1 or 2 additional units. And so it's more of take an existing, which we love to see, take an existing development and rehab it and make it better. We recently had a Motel 6 that went through a conversion process. So the Motel 6 was sold to a housing developer, and they converted the individual hotel rooms into units. And so they added kitchens and turned them into a permanent housing, which is great. These are the things that we're trying to encourage. As an example of that density bonus, the Motel 6, because of the way it was zoned, it was approved for, I forget how many units, let's just say 80 units. When it was a motel, because we don't look at the number of units as a motel, but when they converted to apartments, the zoning didn't allow them to take those 80 units, didn't allow them because the zoning restricted how many units they could have from an apartment perspective. So they were able to use that market rate density bonus to actually convert all of the units to housing. So again, that's something I don't think people realize, is that density bonus doesn't mean that you're just going to get all new development. A lot of it too is adding some of our existing housing stock, making it cleaner, newer, fresher, and sometimes getting more units, which has been super helpful.
Okay. And then I was also curious too, in terms of how you developed your rubric for the density bonuses and some of those, I'm sorry, the slides from a while ago, some of the numbers are kind of mixing in my head, but you had set some criteria of, a certain amount being 80 to 120, a certain amount being to 60, 40, 60, and then that 0 to 40. Are you, when you were building that information, was it based around what the current kind of access is to that housing already in our area, like what it looks like? Or can you just kind of explain how you extrapolated those numbers based off of what information? Oh, thanks.
Yeah, when it came to that affordable housing density bonus, we have had affordable housing density bonus in our code for years, and it has not been used. Again, in the last 3 years, we've had one project, bring 1 extra unit using this density bonus. So we said, we've had this for years and it hasn't really been effective. Let's do more. So we went back at NRS, back at state law, and we broke it down into what affordable housing categories state law outlines. So state law actually has those 3 categories. The 0 to 60% is one kind of category. The 60 to 80% is the second category, and the 80 to 120%. So we felt that this would be more in line with what state law proposes for affordable housing. And we're hoping then that by adding that 60 to 120% density bonus, which we don't currently have, maybe we can get some additional housing product to the market. Most of our affordable housing projects that we see are in that 60% AMI. We don't see a whole lot of workforce housing, more of that 80 to 120%. So we're hoping that this might incentivize some developers that maybe otherwise, maybe they're not able to make it pencil. Maybe if they can get some additional units, they can make it pencil and bring those units to market. So a couple things went into it, right? We just looked at, is what we're doing now enough? And we said, years we've brought 1 apartment unit to market through that density bonus. That doesn't seem to be very successful. And then tying it to what state law allows for in terms of those breakdowns, we said, well, let's give this a try and see if we can get more of that workforce housing to the market.
Okay. Yeah, because it would be really interesting to see, kind of currently what exists in our area in terms of its accessibility, right? Like which of the properties that are in our area, how many of them are falling within these AMI requirements, and kind of really being able to extrapolate, okay, here's where we have a ton of these. What can we do to get some low hanging fruit in here? Like you said, do we increase the density? Do we incentivize building in some of these areas? Or, if there are areas we're already seeing a lot of this type of housing, like Rachel was pointing to, where we have, it seems to me, access to all kinds of housing currently, but cannot actually rent it. Either they're vacant, they're Airbnbs, you know, the rent is too high, whatever the reason is. And so it would be really interesting to see what is already existing on the market in those spaces and kind of using that to help expedite some of these processes, because again, the building is just going to take time and we need housing now.
Yep. Yep. And feel free to send me an email. We do have maps and spreadsheets that show all of the data you're asking for. So
Awesome.
I'm happy to like send you some of that if you're just interested and want to see kind of where these lower income affordable housing products are being built, and what % AMI they're being built with.
That would be really wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, y'all.
Thanks, guys.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
We can.
I wanted to say thank you again for the discussion. This has been really helpful. In my earlier comment, you were talking about the fact that you don't have jurisdiction over tax incentives and programs that I was speaking to. Who would have jurisdiction over the tax incentives and programs? Like, where do we take this conversation?
Yeah, so from a zoning code perspective, the zoning administrator, we don't regulate taxes, right? We have no tax incentives. So specifically, what we are tasked with this initiative is related to our zoning code.
Yeah.
I think there are plenty of departments here at the city of Reno that deal with housing. Specifically, we have a whole team of folks that deal just with affordable housing. That is their sole job, but they don't regulate the zoning code. So from that perspective, we regulate the zoning code. These are things that we're proposing. Separate from that, either at the state, they regulate taxes. I can also put you in contact with our affordable housing group, and they can talk about different tax incentives we currently offer. We do offer affordable housing tax incentives through at the state level that we help kind of oversee different programming. So we can put you in contact with them if there's maybe more specific questions on taxes you want to ask.
It's just the advocacy and the pushing for more rental housing available now that I'm interested in. You know what I mean? I'm interested in taking these conversations to the places where they're needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of our other challenges is, you know, if the landlords are the ones taking in the money, there has to be money to give. So that is something, you know, there has to, you know, the state has to have money offered up for these landlords, or federal government has to offer money up. So that's something to keep in mind too, is there's not just this like endless free bucket of money for housing. So if there's other things we can do to help incentivize those developers, that's what we're looking for right now is, you know, without, from a strictly zoning perspective, what can we do to help those developers that do go after that, the tax rebates and the affordable housing money? How can we help them to get their housing products to market faster? That's kind of some of the incentives that we're proposing with these zone changes.
Yeah.
But Rachel, send me your email, or just shoot myself or Grace or Lauren an email, and we will put you in contact with some of the other staff here at the city that deal more on the affordable housing side of things.
Okay. Was your email in the presentation somewhere?
I think my email is on the Zoom link, but I have your email, so I'll just be sure to send you one after this
Thank you so
presentation.
much. Thank
Yeah.
you so much. I have to go. Thank you.
All right, Ron, go ahead.
Hello, are you there?
We can hear you.
Hi. In regards to the incentives and stuff for developer, we got to be careful not to fall into the Tahoe trap where they use the incentives and then just turn around a few years later to do short-term rentals. And then on another note, you know, a lot of people, obviously, they're coming here from out of state. We got Wall Street money. They're coming here with the anticipation of raising rents. If there's any way to put a moratorium on new purchases to not be able to raise rent for say 2 or 3 years, that would slow a lot of the greed and speculation, what they call pro forma, which is kind of driving this Reno market. The average Californian is coming here with $3 to $5 million, turning around and buying multis, singles, and everything else, and immediately raising the rents and or turning them into Airbnb. And I know that's not an Airbnb discussion. It would also be nice, again, has a lot of opposition when I try to do this on a national level, some type of second home, multi-home tax. So these people that do have a dozen rentals and, you know, taxing, you know, somehow or another getting a multi-ownership tax because they're just coming here and buying a half a dozen houses and doubling the rents. It's so sad to see that happening. It's so sad to see these neighborhoods go into Airbnb. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Ron.
Yeah.
All right, Mike. You are up.
Hey, you just can't get rid of me, can you? While we're on this slide on the density bonuses for affordable housing, you guys have worked with me for years. You know I am the density queen. But this really doesn't do anything to incentivize affordable housing other than the unlimited density for 60%. The proposed density bonuses for based on size of units are more attractive than the affordable housing density bonuses. And it's almost making a disincentive on the affordable level. Although, you know, I will take any density bonus I can, but I have become very aware of what a political document, a planning code is, and realize that what you are proposing must be voted on at the council level. And I think there will be a lot of blowback on some of the density numbers here. I wonder if you have really looked at the science of the density bonuses being proposed based on unit size, of whether an 80% density bonus for units under 1,000 feet is in any way feasible, because I don't believe it is, and I believe there's an overreach going on that will be very hard politically to sell.
Yeah, so Grace, let's go ahead and move to that next slide. I think the one that Mike's talking about is not specific to density bonus for affordability, but more the density bonus based on the square footage of your unit. And so we do have a density bonus based on square footage in our zoning code now. As we mentioned, in 3 years, we've had 60 additional units come to market using that density bonus. So we haven't seen a huge influx of developers using this market rate density bonus just based on square footage, but it's a small step. So Mike, if there's suggestions you have on this or the square footages or the numbers, send us an email. We're definitely happy to hear input from folks like yourself that do development that can provide some better square footages of what you think is realistic to actually make a difference.
Yeah, the one we generally use is the either the 1,000 or the 1,400
Yeah.
level. There is no way, other than one zoning district potentially, that we could ever use an 80% density bonus. I don't think there's any zoning district where more than a 50% density bonus could be used. And I think shooting high without any expectation of it really impacting anything as far as unit count is potentially dangerous at the council level.
Okay, yeah, that's good feedback. All right, and next up, it looks we have James.
Hi, thanks for everything. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can.
Great. I love these incentives. I think it's great. Density creates better, more robust cities and also creates more multi-income housing, which is definitely needed, as the commenters on the panel or the group say today. A question I have is, when you calculate AMI, is that for the entire city of Reno? Is that for the Reno Sparks MSA? And what is the source of that data so we can keep an eye on it as it changes year over year?
Yep, so HUD actually comes out with annual AMI for the jurisdiction.
Okay.
So we recently had, HUD just came out with I'm trying to think of the timeframe. So it's not something the city comes up with. It's HUD comes up with those numbers for each of the jurisdictions.
Great, thank you. Just want to make sure it was HUD or some other source.
Right, yes. All right, looks like George has another question.
I'm sorry, Angela, I just texted you. I didn't want to ask more questions. I didn't realize we were doing follow-up, so I didn't want to interrupt, but I just wanted you to respond to my second comment about the infrastructure and stuff like water mains and sewer lines and increasing infrastructure, where you guys have increased the density or hope to increase density, especially in the downtown core and midtown core areas like Haskell Street. That you need to get coordinated with those people, and that's something that should be a priority if you want this density.
No, agreed. Yeah, I think what Mr. Graham's talking about, especially in these infill areas, most of our sewer lines, our water lines, our storm drain lines, they are all pretty old, and they are sized for smaller developments. And so as we have these bigger projects come in, let's say it's even a 30-unit apartment project come in these smaller infill areas, one of the expenses that the developer then has to deal with is maybe the water line is not sized for another 30 units, or the sewer line's not big enough, or it's falling apart. And so what can the city do to help pay for those improvements to our infrastructure, so it helps the development get in sooner? And something we're dealing with both within our capital improvement plan. You know, as a city, we look at where are the needs in terms of our infrastructure, but we're also trying to be proactive and say, where do we want growth to occur? So if we really want infrastructure in these infill areas, one thing we can do is put these projects in our capital improvement plans. So it's, 1 year out or 2 year out or 3 year out, but we're planning for it and finding ways to fund it. It's something we're definitely talking about with our council.
Hey, Angela, I just want to make a point for all the people who were saying, why are developers getting a free handout? Why would the city pay for this kind of stuff? What I'm talking about, and Haskell is a perfect example, street, and you should take a look at that. That is in the city's plan to replace that water main, but it's not a priority. So what needs to happen is you need to also get with the city and say, you've already decided to replace some of these lines, but they're not replacing them in a prioritization that's consistent with your increase in density. So this is not like some free handout to developers, but it's really just, you've already made the decision that a 95-year-old main needs to be replaced, but I have no idea with properties I own on Haskell when you're going to do that. So I can't build what I might want to build in places where you've given lots of bonuses, or I'm sorry, you've increased the density, you've reduced the parking, and you're making it very clear that it's a place where you want to build and I want to build. But until you replace that main in Haskell, and I'm not picking on that specifically, but it's the one I know well. I'm sure there are other places where you have it on the list, or whoever does this, the city works, has it on the list to replace some of this infrastructure, but it's not lining up with your prioritization of wanting housing now.
Yep. It's a problem. We have more infrastructure needs than we have money. If money was not an issue, we could do it all, but unfortunately, we have a huge growing city and we have a huge infrastructure need. So it becomes a challenge of how do we prioritize that fits every need of the city. And sometimes, individual streets aren't prioritized as number one because maybe the infrastructure on another street is literally falling apart faster. But it's something we're looking at. If we truly want to provide incentives for developers, we need to come up with better ways to prioritize infill infrastructure. I agree. All right, looks like next up, Mr. McGonigal.
I thought I had my hand down.
Are you good?
I'm pretty good. One comment on the duplex, triplex, fourplex in single family districts. Digging a little more into the proposed language, it appears that you cannot build, I could not build a duplex or a triplex with an existing single family home on it, that it would have to become a single structure.
Correct.
I think that's incredibly limiting to a diversity of unit types. And realistically, how this infill could happen. I mean, I would think, if you are going to look, I would think that you could have an existing single family house, and if there's room, add a duplex in the back. But the way the wording of the current proposed code reads, it would all have to be a single attached structure. Is that correct?
It is. Our concern was in these single family zoning districts, we didn't want them to become multi-family zoning districts, so to speak. So if you already have a single family neighborhood with a house and there's no additional units allowed in general, we felt that it would be too much to have that single family home plus a duplex, triplex, fourplex and back. We felt it should just be one or the other. And again, that is specific to our single family zoning districts. In multifamily zoning districts, different rules apply. So you could have multi-buildings on that parcel, but in those single family zoning districts, we just were trying to be cognizant of keeping with the character of a single family neighborhood.
I know this is sort of already allowed in SF8, and because of the conditional use requirements, I'm not aware of a single proposal that has come forward, but I would expect this particular item, the SF3 and SF5, become a huge flashpoint of contention from our council persons' constituencies as this moves forward.
Yeah, and we'll see. Like I said, we're just trying to come up with more options to get more housing product to market through the zoning code. So that's something we're throwing out as an option. I'm not sure if it's going to pass, but the more we can do, the more we can offer, I think is what we've been tasked with coming up with. All right, let's move in. Stephanie.
Hi there.
Go ahead.
I had a question about, thinking about incentivizing that infill development, how you all are squaring that with folks who are leveraging that infill to build hotels instead of housing. I'm thinking in particular of the upcoming, I think there's going to be a 4-star hotel with 270 rooms built in downtown Reno, which I personally think is a bit antithetical to the initiative of encouraging development of housing. And I was just curious about how to kind of square how those incentives may be used for hotels instead of housing, essentially.
So I guess specific to hotels, is that what you're asking? What are we doing to promote housing but not hotels?
Or essentially, I think a lot of the narrative that I've been reading about the quote unquote revitalization of downtown Reno or the Riverwalk district includes some apartment building construction, but also a lot of really upscale hotels that do not serve providing affordable housing, and especially in downtown Reno. So I'm just curious about how folks are squaring those kind of things with this urgent need for affordable housing amidst the construction of things that do not necessarily serve that.
Yeah. So for the most part, our zoning code is really flexible within the downtown area. For the generally speaking, you can do apartments, you can do hotels, you can do retail, you can commercial. All of that can go by right, no public hearing, go straight to a building permit. We don't see a ton of new development in downtown Reno, and we haven't for decades. I think there's talk about development, but we don't see a ton of any kind of really new development. You go to other big cities and there's cranes everywhere. I think we're seeing a lot of cranes closer to the university with work that the university is doing, but we don't have a ton of new development in our downtown core. We're definitely seeing some pockets of the smaller infill projects, whether it's 5 units or 20 units. I'd say more in the Midtown and Wells Avenue, but again, it's not overwhelming. So we are not proposing to do anything to limit development in downtown Reno. If a developer came in today and said, I wanted to build a 5-story apartment complex in Reno, they could go straight to a building permit. We just don't see a lot of those developers coming forth, and what they're telling us is it's very expensive. And the cost to build in downtown Reno, especially any kind of high rise, they can't get the rents to make that pencil. That's just anecdotally what they've been telling us. It's been going on for years. We do have the new ballpark apartments, if the ones across from the Aces Stadium. So those are apartments. Those are going to be a for rent product. So that's exciting to see any kind of for rent, product in our downtown. And again, it's been years since we've seen any kind of real substantial housing in our downtown. So I'm hoping that slowly, incrementally, these projects will kind of kickstart other developers to be able to make it pencil as well. But we just kind of have to ride that out. Not something we can necessarily control from a city perspective. Hotels are allowed, apartments are allowed, but we don't see a whole lot being developed in that downtown core.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Appreciate it.
Okay, and it looks like Megan, you're up next.
Hi, y'all. I just wanted to say, kind of going back to that information piece that we were talking about earlier, I was curious if y'all would be willing to send out an email follow-up from this for folks who weren't able to make it. I know you had recommended that both myself and Rachel email you. But I think some of the information we were talking about would be really helpful for other folks, including that link to making comment about the Airbnbs and short-term rental regulations as well too. So if you wouldn't mind sending out an email that everyone can access, because some people may not have been able to make the meeting but are still interested, so that we can have access to the data that you use for the AMI, as well as any kind of folks you need to connect with in terms of these questions that we couldn't get answered today. And then the link to that survey would be super wonderful, please.
Perfect. No, absolutely. That's good feedback. We can send that out later this week. Okay, and it looks like that is it in terms of comments. So again, just thank you everyone for participating. This is definitely a sensitive topic, something that there's no right or wrong answers. If we knew the answers, I think we would have solved it already, and unfortunately we haven't. But the more feedback we get, are we on the right track? Is this something the community wants to see more of? Should we be pushing more? Have we gone too far? Again, we encourage your feedback. We'll send out that link so you can provide written comments. Keep in mind too that this will be going to Planning Commission on February 7th. And then again, whatever their recommendation is to council, that will be taking place in March and April. So I appreciate everyone taking their morning, and we look forward to continuing to work with you over the next couple of months. Thanks, everyone.